Hi, this is Lee Matney of the Matney Gallery. I'm here with Steve Prince, distinguished artist in residence and director of engagement at the Muscarelle Museum of Art. Uh, Hi, Steve. What's new in your practice?
I have several different things going. One of the last pieces that I created was over at East Carolina University, and I created this piece called The Block, and it is a pretty epic vinyl cut that I created that's 2 feet by 7 feet in scale, and I partly based it upon the history that circulates around the Black community in Greenville, North Carolina, and circulating around East Carolina University. And interesting enough, that history that I spoke about inside the piece, for lack of better words, it explodes itself. And it's something that you'll find in several communities all across the United States, where you have Black communities that were thriving in the face of spaces of constriction, where they were not able to thrive in terms of outside of their space, but they found a way to make a way out of no way within the context of their community. And I find myself making work about that over and over again. And I think that what happens to me is that I begin to reflect upon my parents and my parents' struggle. And I reflect upon my father, and that the fact that my father had artistic acumen, but it was a dream deferred that he was unable to accomplish because of the times which he came up with, because of the constriction of those times. But then my parents, of course, worked very hard, and they create space for me to be able to do what I do. And it's only fitting that I pay homage to those people that did so much to create a space for me to do something that they were denied. And so when I make this piece, The Block, I'm reflecting not upon that community that I descend upon, but I also reflect upon the community that I was reared in. And that image, I have an homage to a woman by the name of LaDonya Wright. And LaDonya Wright was a woman who was advocating for African Americans about healthcare concerns. And then there was another woman by the name of Frances Hopkins. She did something very similar to what a guy named Blaine Blayton did here in Williamsburg, which is, again, Black people weren't able to go to different hospital spaces, so they didn't complain about the situation. They created the space for them. Blaine Blayton in Williamsburg creates a hospital for Black people. And Frances Hopkins turns her house into a hospital. She was a nurse. And again, she wanted to make sure that they got proper medical care, and that people didn't die of things that could have been treated, and then could have lived a longer and more healthy life. And in that same composition, I have this character that I've been playing around with for a few pieces now. And it's my griot character, which is my storytelling character. She's timeless. She's the past, she's the present, and she's the imagined future. And I used her 3 times recently. One I used in this piece, The Block. I used her in this piece that I did, of course, called Peace Quote, which is the mural that is here in Williamsburg, which is, we did the podcast on your site. And I talked about that piece. And I used it in a piece called Peace Table that is in an exhibition at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum, which is located at the University of Oregon. And so this woman recurs over and over again. And in the one that I did for East Carolina, she's carrying in her hand a Sankofa staff. And that is that mythical bird that comes out of Ghana, Africa, that is going forward while looking back. And then inside that image, there is an homage to the corn, the tobacco, the cotton, and the sugarcane, and those different crops that Black bodies were subservient to, and building industries that are still living in this nation was made upon their back. They're almost like sedimentary rock or sedimentary soil that has been built upon their bodies like a palimpsest. And so also in that image, I showed the everyday. A woman braiding the hair of her loved one, a couple dancing on the street with a boombox going, which alludes to the 1980s and the burgeoning of hip hop and a lot of those musical forms coming out of New York and out of California and out of Chicago, and those musical forms of which we know as hip hop that is spread globally. And also in that image is a guy grilling, just making some food and flipping some burgers and some dogs. You know, those things that we know of in the everyday, that even in the midst of our pain and our struggle, we still find places of rest and respite. And that's what's in there. And then I end that piece with a couple of really heavy concepts or constructs. One, there is a funerary dirge, a march that's happening inside the composition. And that dirge is a person is being carried on into the afterlife. But then walking right beside it is a mother with child, with child. There's a child that she's walking beside, but she's also pregnant. So as that life leaves, another life is coming in its place. And I think that bespeaks of those kind of things of those generations. It bespeaks of the idea of the Sankofa to get us to remember as we go forward. And then there's a house in the background because, you know, one key thing, Lee, is when I was traveling from Williamsburg and going to East Carolina, going to Greenville to do this work, I passed through Edenton, North Carolina. And not many people know the history of circulating around Edenton, North Carolina. There was a woman by the name of Linda Brent, one by the pen name of Harry Jacobs. And she wrote a book called Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. Okay. And in that book, she basically talks about escaping from the overtures, the sexual overtures of her slave master by hiding in the attic space of her grandmother's house for 7 years. That's extraordinary. With this woman, the lengths that she goes through to hide away from this terrorism that's happening to her body. And the only reason why she did that, she didn't flee, it's not that she couldn't, she didn't because just as many other women did, she had 2 children that she wanted to stay near, and she did not want to leave her kids behind. And so these extraordinary stories that are embedded within the fabric of our nation that shape us, I think it's so important as the artist to be able to tell them and to share these stories, to be truth-sayer. And it ties right back to the other piece I told you called Piece Table, which is about 42 inches in diameter. And that piece that I created, you know, I literally carved the table, carved out the message there. So when everyone that comes to that table and touches it, they are reminded of that history and all that gets embedded within that space. And that table becomes a silent participant in all that happens in the context of the sacred space of a kitchen. And then the mural, I love doing that piece here in Williamsburg as an extension to what I do as an artist, along with galleries and museum spaces that you and I work in. But the mural is this public space that is not meant to be there forever. And I love that. I love the temporality of it. Because in essence, the mural is just like us. It's like a living, breathing entity that is out in the public to consume, but over time, it will wither away. So it's here for a little while. And then I love the fact that we're on this kind of medium that we'll, in essence, get to keep at least the memory of it alive. And we got photographic references of it. And then there's just going to be a small sector of people that actually saw it. And I think that's power. And I think that's so powerful for us is what we do as, you know, curators of art, as makers of art, as collectors of art, as showcases of art, all these ways in which we interact and engage art. I think these elements are just so important because, in essence, what you and I are doing is preserving history. We're preserving something that's going to outlast both of us, that gets passed on to someone else. And I love the fact that the significance of this moment, that we're sitting here together talking and engaging, and this is important. That we're living, breathing, we both got all of our faculties, and we're able to talk about this work.